Hi, and welcome to the Allplane podcast, where we talk with the movers and shakers that are redefining the future of commercial aviation. As usual, before we start, let me remind you once more that all previous episodes of this podcast, as well as many other aviation stories, are available on the Allplane website. That's Allplane.tv, Allplane.tv. Here on this podcast, we've been privileged to have been able to speak with a good number of entrepreneurs that are working really hard to disrupt the aviation industry, to disrupt it for the better, of course, particularly on the sustainability front. But today I wanted to get also the point of view of the industry, to get a better grasp of what is being done by the major players in aviation, in commercial aviation, so the airlines. And who else better to ask about this than the International Air Transport Association, IATA. This is the industry body that represents around 300 airlines worldwide, including most of the major ones. This is why our guest today is Hemant Mistry, Director of Energy Transition at IATA. Hemant oversees this organization's efforts in areas such as sustainable aviation fuel, SAF, which is very central to IATA's plans for decarbonization. IATA is also evaluating other technologies like hydrogen and electric flight, but in the very short term, what they've done is to develop a number of tools that help airlines and other travel operators as well to better assess their carbon impact so that they can then take action to mitigate it. But I think it's best if we hear it all directly from Hemant. So, without further ado, let me welcome him to the podcast. Hello, Hemant. How are you?
Very good, thanks, Miguel. Pleasure to speak to you today.
Thank you very much for being here today on the podcast. This is actually the second time that we have IATA here being represented at the Allplane podcast, because we did a previous episode about fueling and fueling technology and digitalization, which is a field that I think you know really well. And today we have you here. You are the Director of Energy Transition at IATA. And yeah, like all guests, I will start by asking you to tell us a bit more about yourself and about your role at IATA, and then maybe we can move on to talk about all the different initiatives where IATA is very active in the field of sustainability.
Sure. So yeah, I'll try and be brief in terms of some of my background. I'm an engineer by background, and I started my working career in air traffic control on the engineering side. And then I moved to management consulting, still within the aviation sphere, and really looking at how the aviation supply chain can improve efficiencies and also in terms of competitiveness and how best to invest for the future. And that allowed me to join IATA almost 15 years ago now. And I worked initially in IATA on working with supply chain partners on how to improve efficiency, and also make sure that, of course, various products and services are of the necessary quality and safety standards and all of those aspects as well. And fuel was one of those areas. And recently, what we understanding the priority for sustainability and the need to really move towards net zero, we went through an organizational change, and we pulled together a lot of the work we were doing on the fueling side and a lot of the work we were doing in the environment team, and pulled it all under one portfolio, which was the energy transition portfolio. And I'm the director of that. And most recently, we've gone through another transition where we've now brought together all of the sustainability aspects under a bigger umbrella. So energy transition is one of the key areas that reports under a bigger grouping, which is sustainability and economics, understanding that everything we look at in the future needs to be heading in that direction. And so there's some other areas as well that fit into that overall portfolio of activities. But basically, we're all trying to make sure that as we move forward as an industry, that we're all heading in the necessary direction for sustainability improvement to achieve various aspects, including net zero as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much for this detailed explanation. Actually, you anticipated my next question, which was how you guys at IATA are organized to approach all these different challenges that, the race to net zero poses, because we are seeing there's there are quite a few technologies that are being tested, quite a few different approaches that are not necessarily exclusive with each other. There is SAF, there's hydrogen, there's many, there's offsets as well. There are many different ways that people try to mitigate and ideally decarbonize. We're still some way off that, but I would suggest we can maybe talk about some of the different projects that you guys at IATA are currently undertaking in this area. IATA, basically, it's an association of airlines. So I guess the sustainability is pretty much at the very top of the concerns of your members. And different airlines have been announcing projects of many different sorts lately. I would like to start by talking about SAF, about sustainable aviation fuel. And is there an official position here of IATA? Is there a specific, let's say, time horizon or projects that involve your member airlines that you can talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, first of all, the broader industry is looking at how best to use SAF and how best to increase the production and the utilization of SAF as quickly as possible. And different stakeholders will have slightly different views, etc. But I mean, the important thing to understand is we're all heading in the right direction. There might be slight differences in terms of ambition, but it is definitely all heading in the right direction. Now, from our perspective, what we did, because we represent, as you said, over 290 member airlines, which represents over 80% of the global passenger traffic. So we have a very diverse community of membership across all regions. But what we did was we developed a model to try and best understand how best we can transition and how best we can see the ramp up of SAF utilization across the membership. And according to that modeling, what we're looking at is that 65% of the total carbon abatement by 2050 will be done through the use of SAF, according to that modeling. Now, one of the key aspects is that, maybe just to remind your listeners, one of the key aspects is that this detailed modeling and our view of how we can get to net zero using all the other different decarbonization levers, we presented that to our membership, and we have this commitment for the membership to reach net zero by 2050 as a result of that as well. Mm-hmm. So this is where we see and that gives you an indication of the primacy of the use of SAF to get to net zero as well.
Mm-hmm. I imagine basically you have this sort of, let's say, modeling advisory role, but then each airline is pretty much pursuing this on its own. I guess there is no specific coordinated action by all the airlines in IATA. Am I right?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, our role is really to see how best we can facilitate the ramp up of SAF, work with the broader supply chain as well, and to make sure that there are better practices out there in terms of supporting procurement or whatever those aspects are, right? And then we can coordinate with the airlines so that they can best have the right tools for the procurement side and all of the other aspects as well, and really work with industry to coordinate a broader that transition to the ambition, basically, right?
Do you have any specific position on which SAF technologies would be better? Or you just keep an open mind for all the different approaches, processes? We have the HEFA process. There's also a lot of talk about synthetic fuels, power to liquid fuels. Mm-hmm. Are you agnostic when it comes to technology and ramping up SAF production?
In principle, yes, first of all. But also, as we try to facilitate the ramp up of SAF, it's also important for us to work, as I say, across the supply chain and so on, to make sure that there is sufficient new development of SAF and the different opportunities are investigated at the right time. So, for example, right now, as you rightly pointed out, the majority of SAF is developed through the HEFA pathway, which is hydroprocessed esters and fatty acids. Use cooking oils, for example, right?
Yeah.
And that is really the primary source of SAF as we see right now, and maybe for the next 3 to 5 years overall. But over time, as we see the ramp up of SAF, we would like to see that what we would call the third generation feedstocks are more investigated, and that also provides a greater opportunity in terms of the ramp up of SAF as well across different regions. So the third generation feedstocks, by the way, heifer would be an example of a second generation feedstock. Algae and so on would be an example of a first generation feedstock. So we're really moving forward in a progressive way in terms of feedstocks. Third generation feedstocks would include things like forestry and agricultural residues, and also municipal waste, etc. And these types of feedstocks will have greater availability across different regions, and also therefore allow SAF to feedstock and production to be available on a more local level as well across different parts of the world. So we see a great opportunity there, and also in terms of economies of scale and costing side as well. So this is really the sort of transition we'd be looking to move forward.
Yeah. How active is IATA in, let's say, in helping shape policy in these areas? We've seen in the EU, for example, the Refuel initiative that is setting up rather ambitious goals in terms of SAP adoption and ramp up. Is this an area where IATA has been actively involved in the discussion? Are there channels for IATA and your member airlines to basically shape these type of measures?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think, policy is really, really important in enabling the transition for airlines to net zero. And we need the right sort of policy measures. And if I can just step back a little bit, because I think one of the important things for governments to maybe consider as they go forward is policy needs to be complementary, to across different governments and global policy and all of those things. There needs to be a more joined up thinking as to how policy measures will actually enable the aviation industry, which, let's not forget, is not a local industry, it's an international industry, right? So you need policy to be more internationally coordinated. It's fundamentally important. So if we can make sure that governments really think about policy as more of a integrated approach to how best to facilitate energy transition, and not to have overlapping, conflicting policies which don't really help, but may add on cost to the airlines, which then basically diverts investment which would be required for net zero, you see. So we are involved in all policy measures where we try to make sure that it's more aligned to how we can best get to net zero. So Fit for 55 is one of the areas as well where we've tried to make sure that there's more joined up thinking. And we have had some concerns in terms of the way that's been heading. The idea of the ambition and all of those aspects is good. Sometimes the idea of, for example, having sub-targets for PTL and so on may not be the right aspect at this stage, because that technology, although we talked about SAF earlier in terms of biomass, using biomass, but using power to liquid solutions requires a bit more research and development at this stage. So it would be better for governments to think about how best to facilitate that R&D as opposed to having a procurement objective on that technology right now. So, and I think that's the kind of decision which needs to be taken more carefully as to where government support should really focus on technology development, focus further down the actual R&D side, as opposed to just focus on what would be a procurement aspect itself.
Yeah, indeed. I must say, I personally found quite ambitious the target set up by this policy when it comes to synthetic fuels, because, as you said, it's a very promising but still very early stage technology. We had actually here on this podcast, we had some people that come from this side of the industry, and it was absolutely fascinating what they told us. But yeah, I mean, if you look at the volumes that they are producing now, it's still very, very small. So I hope it's gonna work out. But yeah, very ambitious.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then in the meantime, you are doing as IATA, you are busy with other initiatives that aim to provide more transparency and more, let's say, better ways for people to estimate their carbon footprint and to
Yeah.
take decisions accordingly. One of them is the one that's called IATA CO2 Connect, and it's basically it's a model that you have made available through online for, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it can be used via API as well, so people can embed that into their own um, calculation tools to basically to estimate the carbon footprint when traveling by air. What can you tell us about this project, the CO2 Connect?
Yeah, and I think this is really, the complementary side to us moving forward on the energy transition aspect. We also want the consumer to have visibility of what the CO2 impact is, of course. So we developed through our standards making mechanism, we worked with industry partners to develop a basic methodology for CO2 impact per flight. And that's a standard sort of almost like a calculation mechanism which anybody can use. And of course we're expecting more and more industry partners to start to use that basic methodology. So that's really important, because when a consumer starts to consider which flight to book and so on, they more and more want to see what the CO2 impact is. And it's really important that that calculation is done in a standardized way, so consumers don't see conflicting numbers. That's confusing for people. It doesn't help. So we worked on making sure that we have a clear methodology which is fair, and basically, provides that necessary transparency for the consumer in terms of booking. Now, so obviously we will hope to see more of the aggregators and so on take up that methodology over time, so there'll be more consistency for the consumer. Now, that's a generic methodology, of course, and there's only so much data you can use to actually provide, the indication for that for a particular flight per leg or per aircraft. Now, CO2 Connect, you mentioned, is a much more sophisticated tool where you can work with it, where IATA and other stakeholders can work with airlines. And it's the airlines that's able to provide more sophisticated data on a per flight, per aircraft type, per configuration type, etc. So it provides much more accuracy for the consumer in terms of what is actually the CO2 impact. Again, using the same sort of methodology, but much more granularity in terms of the data and so on as well. And all this data then feeds into general improvement of basic data which is available, etc. So this is all of I think a very important aspect about providing transparency to consumers. This also drives, the aspect of us being able to track net zero as well going forward, right? It's really important. So it's not just a question of trying to make sure we have the ramp up and airlines are buying SAF, or we haven't spoke about other energy carriers like hydrogen and so on. Maybe we can talk about that.
Yeah,
But
sure.
it's also about being able to track
Mm-hmm.
how we're doing. It's really important that we're able to show that we're making progress, etc. So we also have a program which is Track Net Zero, which will be looking at how best we can collect the right data from the airline so we can track the industry's progress and have that available to different stakeholders, governments and financiers and other aspects as well. So really important that we're looking at both sides of this, how we get there and show that we're getting there as well.
Because this CO2 Connect, you have developed basically a way for that to use this technology, this calculator. If you are, for example, you are an online travel agent, or you are an airline or some travel provider, you could use that, so it plugs into your system and people can just input their travel data, so going from point A to point B, and then calculate what's a carbon footprint based on the methodology that you have developed, right? So
Exactly. That's
it
the
will tell you,
methodology. Yeah.
okay,
Yeah, exactly. And the CO2 Connect is provides more granularity that requires a bit more airline specific data, but it provides more, it's a more sophisticated calculator. Exactly. Yeah.
And is it free to use?
The methodology one will be, yes, but as I say, the CO2 one requires the airline inputs as well, so it's a bit more sophistication required on that. Yeah, yeah,
Okay, very good.
yeah,
What you mentioned other pathways to get to this net zero. There's obviously hydrogen, electric. What sort of activities you as IATA have in those fields? I'm asking that because I know many of your airlines are relatively large airlines. You have lots of what used to be known as flag carriers, all these big network airlines. So I don't know up to what point this, for example, electric flight is relevant to you because it's a field of development of the sustainable aviation that so far is touching mostly, let's say, more like regional and local air travel. And hydrogen is a different story, but maybe we're a bit farther from that until the Airbuses and the Boeings develop the the aircraft that can run on that fuel. What's your activity here in these areas? I don't know if you have a specific programs, projects, initiatives that you can comment
yeah.
on.
Yeah, I know indeed, and I think it's a really important point. I mean, first of all, as I mentioned earlier, SAF is our primary vehicle to support net zero. But of course, we're looking at all other energy solutions as well. And as you rightly say, there's two other options. There's the use of battery and the use of hydrogen. Now, the use of battery comes with certain power to weight limitations. Which means that battery-powered aircraft would probably have limitations in terms of distance and size of aircraft, very much limited to sort of more domestic or very small commuter type applications, I would guess. SAF, of course, let's not forget, SAF has a great benefit because it's a drop-in solution to conventional jet fuel. So with SAF, what's really important for people to understand is you're able to just mix it with conventional fuel and in the future just use 100% SAF as well. But you don't have to change anything on the ground system in terms of tanking at the airport, the fueling system, or even anything on the aircraft systems, including the engines. Everything works as is. So with SAF, you're ready to go, right?
Yeah.
With hydrogen, it would require quite a significant retrofit or a new airframe design itself, because hydrogen provides a very different solution. First of all, there's a lot more R&D required for R&D for hydrogen to come to maturity right now. So let's not think it's a ready solution right now. But as the developments come to maturity, we can foresee that there would be opportunities for new aircraft, which would have a slightly different tank solution, storage solution on board the aircraft, because the fuel wouldn't be stored in a wing because the volume is required. So you have to have a separate tank in the aircraft itself. But it does provide more thrust, more power than jet. But there are challenges in terms of how you would store that energy carrier itself, right? So with that complete refiguration on the aircraft or a new airframe and so on, there are solutions for hydrogen. And of course, the benefit hydrogen provides is that there's no CO2 emissions as a result of its combustion as well, right? So we're looking at that, but we're not seeing any solutions really come in terms of use until about after 2035.
Do you have any specific projects in this area in hydrogen? Same way that, for example, you have I mean you've been actively involved in this, let's say, SAF lobbying or SAF policy consultation.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I think we're actively tracking what's happening in terms of the R&D space for hydrogen, looking to see what various actors are doing. I mean, first of all of the big OEMs I know are involved in some shape or form on hydrogen, although it's at the early stages. There are quite a few smaller companies which are being very innovative in
True.
terms of what can be
Yeah.
done, and there's some good solutions, right?
Yeah.
So we are coordinating with these different parties to see how best this can provide a solution going forward. But right now, our immediate priorities is definitely on making sure we have the right ramp up of SAF
Mm-hmm.
and the necessary volumes, because this is one of the problems which we really are looking to resolve very quickly, and we are heading in the right direction. Is that the production volume for SAF right now is quite low.
Yes.
So what we want to see is more ramp up in terms of SAF production, so that the airlines have the ability to procure the volumes of SAF which they want to do to get towards net zero itself. Now, the good thing is, if I may just to continue on that, the good thing we see is that when we look at the production volume for renewable fuel capacity going in, the refining capacity going in for renewable fuels, we are seeing a big ramp up on that. And SAF would normally be a cut of that, you see. So the output for a renewable fuel refinery normally can and should have a percentage of SAF as an output as well. So as we see this general volume ramp up for renewable fuel capacity around the world, we should see a ramp up in terms of SAF itself. So this is something where we're really putting a priority.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, thank you very much for this very detailed overview of what you guys are doing as the major industry body. I thought it was really a must to have your point of view on all these different options, different pathways we are commenting, because we here on this podcast and on the Allplane website, we often talk about all this, but it's often from the point of view of entrepreneurs that are somehow a bit of outsiders of the industry that are trying to transform it from outside. But it's good to know, what's the point of view of the insiders, like in this case, like the body representing nearly 200 airlines, some of the most important, largest airlines out there. For people that wish to learn more about what you guys do at IATA, and very particularly about these tools that you have online for people to use and to plug into, where should they look at? Where would you direct them to?
Well, I mean, first of all, our website is I think, I hope also is very useful for your listeners, and I would recommend just to search on the website first of all, and basically if there's a need for more detailed information, tell me.
That's IATA.org, yeah?
IATA.org, yeah,
Yeah,
indeed.
not .com or .org.
No.
Okay.
Indeed, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm very happy if there's more detailed questions or so on to direct them directly to me. And my email address is Mistry MISTRYH @IATA.org, and I'd be very happy to either answer questions directly or to field them to one of our expert staff as well. So.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Hemant, for your time today and for giving us the point of view of the industry about all this very current topic of airline sustainability, aviation sustainability. And yeah, I'll invite everyone to go check these resources. I'm going to be posting links on the show notes as well, so that everyone can check and that people can play around a little bit also with the CO2 calculators. So is this a tool you keep working on? I mean,
Yes,
the data is being updated, so it's getting better and better as you get more data points.
Indeed, that is the overall objective, to have richer data as we go forward as well, and so the accuracy will always improve. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Hemant.
Thank you.
Before you go, one last word from me. If you like this podcast, please give it a rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get this podcast from. That really helps get the word out. Thank you very much, and see you soon.